On the morning of August 25, 1989, the sky over Gilgit, Pakistan, was perfectly clear. It was a beautiful day for flying, especially through the majestic Karakoram mountain range. At Gilgit Airport, passengers were boarding Pakistan International Airlines Flight 404, a scheduled domestic flight to the capital Islamabad. The aircraft for this short but scenic journey was a Fokker F-27 Friendship, a reliable turboprop that had been a workhorse for regional airlines around the world for decades. On board were 49 passengers and 5 crew members, a total of 54 people. In command was Captain Nasser Ali Khan, with his first officer by his side. For many passengers, this was a routine flight, a quick hop over the mountains that separated the remote northern areas from the rest of the country. Gilgit Airport itself is one of the most challenging in the world. Nestled deep in a valley, it's surrounded by some of the planet's tallest peaks. Its runway is short, just 5,500 feet long, and ends abruptly with a steep drop followed immediately by rising terrain. Pilots call it a hot and high airport, meaning the high altitude and often warm temperatures reduce aircraft performance, making takeoffs and landings particularly tricky. Flying in and out of Gilgit requires exceptional skill, precise calculations, and a deep respect for the unforgiving environment. At 7:36 a.m., Captain Khan lined up the Fokker F-27 on the runway. The pre-flight checks were complete, and the control tower gave the all-clear for takeoff. The engines spooled up to their familiar whine, and Flight 404 began its takeoff roll. Everything seemed normal. Witnesses on the ground watched as the plane accelerated down the asphalt strip. It lifted off the ground, becoming airborne just as expected. But then something went terribly wrong. Instead of climbing into the clear blue sky, the aircraft struggled. It seemed to hang in the air for a moment, failing to gain any meaningful altitude. Then it began to sink. Horrified onlookers watched as the plane, just seconds after taking off, drifted inexorably towards the rising terrain just beyond the end of the runway. About a kilometer from the airport, the F-27 struck the rocky hillside. The impact was catastrophic. A huge fireball erupted, and the aircraft disintegrated, scattering debris across the mountain slope. For the 54 souls on board, there was no chance of survival. All were lost in an instant. The news of the crash sent shockwaves across Pakistan. It was, at the time, the deadliest accident in the history of Pakistan International Airlines and the worst aviation disaster ever to occur at Gilgit. The question on everyone's mind was simple: what happened? On a clear morning, with an experienced crew and a reliable aircraft, how could a routine takeoff end in such a devastating tragedy? The search for answers began immediately as investigators from Pakistan Civil Aviation Authority were dispatched to the crash site. The scene they found was one of complete devastation. The aircraft had been obliterated, making the task of recovering evidence incredibly difficult. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, the crucial black boxes, were recovered from the wreckage. As investigators pieced together the evidence, a disturbing picture began to emerge. The beautiful, clear weather had not been a factor. The aircraft's engines and flight controls showed no signs of a pre-impact mechanical failure. The focus of the investigation quickly shifted from the machine to the human element, and specifically to the critical moments leading up to the takeoff. The first major clue came from the aircraft's load sheet. This is a vital document that details the weight and balance of the aircraft, including passengers, cargo, and fuel. For any flight, but especially one from a high-altitude airport like Gilgit, these numbers must be precise. An overloaded aircraft, or one that is improperly balanced, will not perform as expected. It will require a longer runway to take off, it will climb more slowly, and it will be less responsive to the pilot's controls. When investigators examined the load sheet for Flight 404, they found it indicated the aircraft was operating within its legal weight limits. But something didn't add up. Eyewitness accounts and physical evidence suggested a different story. The investigation took a critical turn when they decided to do something that should have been done before the flight ever left the ground. They started weighing the baggage and cargo that had been checked in for Flight 404. What they discovered was shocking. The aircraft was not within its limits at all. In fact, it was dangerously overloaded. The official investigation report later concluded that Flight 404 was more than 1,100 kilograms, or about 2,500 pounds over its maximum certified takeoff weight. How could such a massive discrepancy happen? The investigation revealed a systemic and deeply ingrained problem at PIA's Gilgit station. Baggage and cargo were frequently being loaded onto aircraft without being properly weighed. The station didn't even have a functional set of weighing scales. Instead, station staff were simply estimating weights and filling out the load sheets with falsified numbers to make it appear that everything was compliant. It was a culture of getting the flight out at any cost, a dangerous shortcut that prioritized schedules over safety. This single discovery explained why the aircraft had struggled to climb. The extra weight was like an invisible anchor, holding the plane down. The investigators then ran performance calculations based on the aircraft's actual weight, the high altitude of Gilgit, and the morning's temperature. The results were chilling. At its actual weight, the Fokker F-27 would have needed at least 6,000 feet of runway to safely take off and clear the mountains ahead. Gilgit's runway was only 5,500 feet long. From the moment the brakes were released, Flight 404 was doomed. It was a mathematical impossibility for the plane to fly safely that day. But the chain of errors didn't stop with the overloading. The investigation also turned its attention to the actions of the flight crew in the cockpit. While they were tragically misled by the falsified load sheet, their own pre-flight planning was found to be inadequate. The report noted that even at the correct weight, the performance margins for a Fokker F-27 taking off from Gilgit were extremely thin. It required meticulous planning and precise execution. The investigators found two more critical errors made by the pilots. The first was the flap setting. For takeoff, especially from short and high-altitude runways, pilots extend the flaps on the wings. This increases the wing's surface area and curvature, generating more lift at lower speeds. This allows the aircraft to get airborne sooner and climb more steeply. The required flap setting for Flight 404's takeoff was between 15 and 20 degrees. However, analysis of the wreckage and flight data showed that the crew had attempted the takeoff with the flaps completely retracted, set at 0 degrees. This mistake drastically reduced the aircraft's lift and climb capability, compounding the already critical overloading problem. The second error was related to the captain's handling of the aircraft during the takeoff roll. It was found that Captain Khan, who had limited experience flying the demanding Karakoram routes, rotated the aircraft pulling back on the controls to lift the nose too early and at too low a speed. With the plane being heavily overweight and having no flaps extended, it needed every possible knot of speed it could get on the runway. By rotating early, the aircraft lifted off the ground in a semi-stalled state. It was flying, but just barely on the very edge of its aerodynamic capabilities. Instead of climbing away, it entered a state pilots call mushing, where it was airborne but unable to gain altitude, flying parallel to the rising terrain, so a catastrophic chain of events was now clear. A dangerously overloaded aircraft due to a systemic failure of ground procedures. A critical error in configuring the aircraft for takeoff with no flaps selected. And finally, a premature rotation that lifted the plane off the ground without enough energy to climb. Any one of these factors alone would have made the takeoff hazardous. Combined, they made the crash inevitable. The hillside that lay just beyond the runway became an immovable obstacle that the crippled aircraft had no hope of clearing. The final report from the Pakistani Investigation Board was scathing. It placed blame squarely on the shoulders of PIA's station management at Gilgit for their chronic disregard for safety procedures, the falsification of official documents, and the absence of basic equipment like weighing scales. The report also criticized the flight crew for their inadequate pre-flight planning and their failure to follow standard operating procedures for the flap setting. It also questioned why, when the aircraft was clearly not accelerating as expected, the crew did not make the decision to reject the takeoff. The crash of Flight 404 served as a brutal wake-up call for Pakistan International Airlines and the country's aviation regulators. In the aftermath, sweeping changes were implemented. PIA immediately suspended all Fokker F-27 operations into Gilgit. Strict weight and balance controls were introduced across the airline's entire network. Functional weighing scales were installed at all remote stations, including Gilgit, ending the practice of estimating weights. Furthermore, it became mandatory for flight crews to perform detailed takeoff performance calculations for every single flight, taking into account the exact weight, temperature, and altitude. This ensured that pilots would always know if the performance margins were acceptable before ever pushing the throttles forward. Eventually, the Fokker F-27 was replaced on the Gilgit route by smaller, more capable aircraft like the de Havilland Canada Twin Otter, which was better suited to the extreme conditions of these mountain airfields. Today, on the hillside above Gilgit, where Flight 404 met its end, a simple memorial stands. It's a solemn and grim reminder of the 54 lives lost on that clear August morning. The tragedy of PIA Flight 404 is a powerful case study in aviation safety. It underscores the critical importance of every single link in the safety chain, from the ground staff weighing baggage to the pilots in the cockpit. It teaches us that in aviation, especially in challenging environments like mountain flying, there is absolutely no margin for error. Shortcuts, complacency, and a culture that prioritizes schedules over safety can, and do, have devastating consequences. The lessons learned from that day have undoubtedly made flying in Pakistan and around the world safer for everyone. Thank you for watching. If you found this story informative, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content on aviation history and safety. Stay safe.